what I love best of all the rest is singing with my friends. So don't take me back to a blue Hawai'i. I wanna be in heaven by the sea. Take me back to my little glass shack, my honey's tavern. I seem to hear nobody calling me. Well, beneath the blue Hawaiian moonlight, where the palm trees sway, beach boys sing Liko and sweet corner moon. And you picture me down by the sea, singing old-time melodies, the kind of songs that seem long gone are the ones I love to sing. And on my isle of golden dreams it's Bali High and Waikiki, and when Matilda comes to town it's tiny bubbles and one more round. Well, I just drop by to see if I could find myself a job, hanging around those country towns, begging from time to time. Well, I've pounded nails and a few guardrails, partied with the Portuguese jokes, and what I love best of all the rest is singing with my friends. Well, on my isle of golden dreams it's Bali High and Waikiki, and when Matilda comes to town it's tiny bubbles and you're upside down. Just drop by to see if I can find myself a job, hanging around those country towns, begging from time to time. Well, I've pounded nails and a few guardrails, partied with the jokes, and what I love best of all the rest, singing with my friends. So don't take me back to a blue Hawai'i. I wanna be in heaven by the sea. Take me back to my little glass shack and my honey's tavern. I seem to hear nobody calling me. Oh, take me back to my little glass shack and my honey's tavern. I seem to hear nobody calling me. Recent song about a couple of years ago, has to do with all the, has to do with pressure. They were having all the marches on about the GMO, and I mean, really, heavy stuff has happened in communities, especially in Waimea, Kauai. So it's like, really a heavy message, a heavy message. Sometimes some things are hard to erase, poisons especially, but there's a lot of things that give pressure, so. Okay, where's my trust? Oh, okay, cause sounds okay. So I was sitting there all by myself. Come on this side. And usually I get involved in a lot of marches and stuff, but I had a kind of a premonition. I had a dream about it. Everybody was marching except me. I was sitting on the grass. And sure enough, that's what happened. All of a sudden I missed my ride, and it was an eerie feeling, almost the whole entire east side of Kauai, down at the the county building there, because just trying to bring attention to something that, is once it's spoiled, it's hard to erase certain things. So this song came. I feel a burning in my eyes, rain falling on my roof. You know water ain't waterproof. Some businessmen, they sell the soul of the earth and all of its glory. Poison man, he take the life, for the life gets a chance to do right from the pressure. Talking about pressure, bring your love back down. Mirror, mirror on the wall, pressure of all. Jackie nimble, Jackie quick. Yes, I know you want a house to live in. Drill her through the flesh and bone. Talking about pressure, bring your love light down. Put your body talk about it in the forum. We're gonna be the drumming in the pressure. Talking about pressure, bring your love light down for me. Pressure coming down on me. I feel like living in a tree. Don't wanna work just for the Yankee dollar. When every day you're getting deeper and deeper. What about the young couples so in love? Asking for a blessing for them from above. How they gonna raise their family when they can't buy it and they can't live free from the pressure? Talking about pressure, bring your love light down for me. So put your bodies to the dance, and may I seek, and may I ask, talk about it in forum. You're gonna be the drum. And I know you're supposed to have beat the drum. Otherwise, it'd be a completely different situation in Hawaii without what has happened, in the face of everything that we're facing now. So I'd like to sing a song. One day it came to me while I was washing dishes. And after we had had our village up in Anahola with Mike and Sandra Grace, it was too good to be true. It couldn't stand in the face of the way, the things have been running here in Hawaii with respect to people being able to live on the land, Weren't quite ready for it. Anyway, we lost our place and we had to go back, off the beach and where my son was born, very simple lifestyle, get jobs and all this stuff. So washing the dishes one day, and a lot of songs I've written and other people have written, and Queen Lili'o Kalani has written herself about her people, about the situation here. So this one came to me, and the voice told me, like, well, Liko, try tell it this way. Song, and then the melody came to me. So I just put down my stuff and I just picked up my guitar. And it's entitled Love Letters. And fortunately for us here in Hawaii, historically much different than other places, and what we have the opportunity now is to still live in peace together. And the Queen, you know, as we all know historically, said Hawaiian people stand on Homananui. It's been 120 years since then. And certain things are showing, especially with respect to the Hawaiian culture. And after 50 years of a renaissance, Terry, Bart, both, we went all Kaho'olawi together, Kalama Valley together, and so many other places, and so many people that are not here, just struggling for you know, to uphold the dignity of a human person, to be worthy and do something, work, whatever your station is, you know. And so I consider her writings kind of like as love letters. This was her plea, especially when she, in her final times, to call out for the honesty of the American people. That one day, that the honesty of the American people will come forth. And I really believe that this is the time where it's calling for that, in the spirit of aloha and healing, and making a big good place for us to live, be an example. You know, so, a song called Love Letters. Got to play this up on Kauai at the charter school last year with a violinist and a banjo player. And we played it and it was really wonderful. Just goes to show you, you know, instruments and music, they cross borders. It just brings hands. It's a song called Love Letters in the Sand, from a woman to a man. I'm begging of you, please, restore your pride and dignity. Love letters, I am told, were sent a long time ago. I'm waiting for an answer, please. Love letters from the Queen, and love letters from her heart. Tell me someday we'll go back. We'll be happy playing in the sun. Papa working in the taro patch. Love letters from her heart. Tell me someday we will never part. And until then, until we meet again, take these love letters from my heart. but she was in chains in the castle of the king. Love letters from her heart tell me someday we will go on back and we'll be happy playing in the sun. Papa working in the taro patch. Love letters from her heart tell me someday we will never part. And until then, until we meet again, take these love letters from my heart. And until then, until we meet again, take these love letters from my Mahalo. Nice to see you guys. See you guys on the street. Hopefully not holding signs. But we will be, but at least you want to enjoy it, you know? Sometimes you hold signs with us. Right on. Well, thank you for sharing your time. Thank you.
Okay. No. Thank you. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Aloha, everyone. Is the mic okay? Yeah. Okay. Welcome to LaborFest Hawai'i, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'd like to begin with first a brief community building activity. If you could please turn to someone sitting near you who you don't know and introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do. 2 minutes.
Glad I got out of there. Years. Yeah. Like he's an artist and a spiritual man. Very the songs are beautiful. About the land and the people and all of things. They're good. He certainly did. That's when I met him. It was when he first played that song, Malakuli Blues, with some other good turn into one album. He was the original. Hey, it was great here. Beautiful music. It was nice. He remembers, yeah. Remember, yeah. But it was really, he was done in a really sweet style. Really, he's never lost it. Yeah, he's really sweet on the presentation. He's humble and sweet. It was beautiful. Hey, he's good. I have to tell you
Okay. Woo!
Okay.
Very interesting.
Okay, now I'd like to direct your attention to the programs, please. If you could turn it over on the back. You can see that this is truly a community event. There's so many people that we need to thank, and I mean, this event wouldn't have been possible without all the folks that you see listed here. I'd like to give a special thank you to United Public Workers Director Dayton Nakanalua and the staff here at UPW for hosting the event. Thank you so much. I'd like to also thank fellow core organizers and friends, Mr. David Carr, Josh Frost, Amy Peruso, Don Boast, Elaine Mizrachi, she's up front, Diego and Saya Medina, my kids always help, and Noel Kent, and of course Ray Catania. Thank you guys. LaborFest Hawaii is not a feel-good circle of airheads. It brings together labor and social justice organizers to vigorously discuss and debate the important issues facing workers in Hawaii, the U.S., the continent, and around the world. Ray Catania is a local labor organizer who joins us from Hawaii, but he has some history and he's from here. He's done quite a bit here as well. He is a treasure, and he has the ability to make people laugh as he fires them up about the issues facing workers today. And we're so lucky to have you MC tonight. Thank you so much.
How's it, everybody? You guys can hear? Yeah, I'm kind of fired up being here too. And before I came here yesterday, I talked to some beautiful women from decolonial Pinay, a group of young Filipinos interested in organizing Filipino workers and supporting the Hawaiian liberation movement and doing good community work. So I really got a good start when I came back home. Before I introduce Mr. Charlot, who's basically going to be talking about his father's fresco work, especially the ones that adorn the walls outside, which are really incredibly beautiful. I just wanted to mention that I want to thank UPW. I was a member of UPW for nearly 12 years as a paramedical assistant. And I worked at Waimano Home and Training School, and later at Halehaole, and over at Mahilona Hospital on Kauai. And the reason why I ended up on Kauai was because I was facing privatization, like how the public workers face today in Maui and other state hospitals. And I was going to lose my job, but because we have a union and we have a seniority protection, UPW does a good job of protecting its workers and making sure that we get work in other areas as soon as possible. So what happened, I had a job opportunity to work at Mahilona Hospital from Waimano Training School, Waimano Home and Training School, where I had worked there. And then later on I worked at Halehaole, which is another facility to help adults with developmental disabilities. And when I got laid off from there, the union came in right away and they found me work back at Mahilona Hospital again. So I know that UPW is like other public worker unions. They really fight for the workers. And thank you, UPW, for giving us this opportunity. I don't want to blabber too much about his father, John Charlot, G-E-A-N, and he's John. I keep mixing it up. But his father's artwork really depicts the struggles of working people in Mexico, in Europe, Latin America, and around the world. And one of the things that gets me of what his dad says is that his art is for the working people and to give us inspiration and nourishment for the mind and body so that we can continue to fight for social justice. That's all I have to say. So we have John Charlot here that can do the talking about his father's artwork. Thank you.
Well, that's the point I want to make too. First, let me thank Leslie Lopez and the UPW for inviting me here and for spoiling me now that I'm here. I've seldom been treated so lavishly on this kind of a talk. Or any kind of a talk. Anyway, I'm talking about my father, who was born in 1898 and died here in Honolulu in 1979. And he was unusual because he went through 4 culture areas in his life: Europe, Mexico, the mainland United States, and then from 1949 till he died in 1979, Hawaii and the Pacific. Now, each one of those places has its own specialness, and my father really was interested in finding out what that was. But there are also constant themes and concerns in his work, and so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, is the differences and the themes, the similar themes as he goes through his life. Now, he had his early youth in France, which was very much the center of modern art, and he was particularly interested in Cubism. And the Cubists were starting from the rectangle, and they were saying, you know, if we put lines like that and like that, we have a grid, and we can, you know, compose against this grid. We can make a really nice solid structure like a table or a chair, or we can do any sort of thing. And what my father is doing with the grid in this case is exploding it, because this is a picture. He was in World War I, and this is his experience of having a German shoot at him. He actually saw the German aim the gun at him, shoot towards him, and he thought, you know, this is what he was coming. And so that's the bullet, and it's as if the picture were a pane of glass, and it cracks the pane into all these different areas, into these different surfaces, and each surface reflects some aspect of his war experience. And it's different from the usual Cubism, because the usual Cubism was so interested in style. They do maybe flowers or something. And my father wanted to tell a story. He said, you know, I'm telling the story of the time I almost got shot. And then he also wanted a message, which was, we shouldn't be doing this. So that was very characteristic of his work, that his pictures were going to be emotional. They were going to tell an emotional story, and they would have a point. They would try to do some good. Stop the war, stop the social injustices that led to war. Now, okay, so he goes to Mexico, and this is one of his first murals in Mexico. It's called Cargadores, or the burden bearers, and it's 1923. And you can see that it's a very sad picture. As he arrives in Mexico, they just finished their Mexican Revolution, where the poor people rose up against the rich, and the poor people won. The workers won, the peasants won, the Indians won, and then nothing changed. Okay, the rich were still rich, the poor were still poor, the men were still being taken out of their villages and sent off to some forsaken place to work in the mines. And here we can see at the top, you can barely see it, but there's a kind of glowing factory or something up there. We aren't told what it is. All we know is that these men are just cargo carriers up the steep mountain to do what? But here at the bottom, there's a group that's unstable. You see there's kind of a ball there, and we know that that will roll. And so we see two people straining forward. They're trying to go high, but the guy in the middle is just collapsing backwards. And he's going to end up like this fellow sitting here. In other words, it's kind of like Christ carrying his cross up the mountain to be crucified, and he falls several times on the way. So it's very unstable. It's using, you see cubist things, those straight lines. It's using a nice volume, that sort of rectangular block, but it's doing it not to create something stable, but just like Bullet, the previous piece, to show a terrible instability, that there's something terribly wrong. Next one, please. Now this contrasts with this. it's a wall that has 7 panels like this. The first one we looked at is on the right side, and this is on the extreme left side. And I'd ask you to remember that because he uses the same device here at the UPW building, where each bookend panel gives us a way of interpreting what he does in the middle panels. Now here we see also people who are carrying burdens. Life is work, but it's stable. They're happy. They aren't being exploited. They're living their own village life. They aren't working for some conglomerate. They're doing their own village work. And so they will take their laundry home and wear it. Who knows what will happen to those packages the men were carrying. And to show the stability, you have the little girl there who represents the future. My father always liked to put in children because that showed that there was another generation coming. And as children do, they kind of watch what the parents do, and then they pick it up without instruction and just carry it along. So this is the good part. This is the good life. This is the Mexican Indians living their own life in their village, whereas the other one was the Mexico under foreign domination, where people are brought into a very different context. So here the whole thing is stable. Okay, you see the nice solid vertical lines, the nice horizontal lines. It gives you a sense of peace. These people are on their land. Okay. Now, we have then male and female. We have foreign and domestic. And that is how my father wants you or wanted you to look at the artworks in between. But there's something even beyond that, and that is the monumental treatment of workers. These are very large. You see, that's just the top of a door there. These are very large panels. And they aren't about kings or queens or, you know, generals or stuff like that. They're about peasants, you know. Why would you put a peasant up on that big wall? Okay, so this was quite unusual. And nowadays we're a little bit more used to it, but at the time people were horrified. What a horrible thing to put on that nice big wall. But of course, what my father and his friends saw was that they had to change people's self-image. They had to change the picture of the worker, both for the worker and for the other people. So hopefully somebody coming by these would say, well, you know, that is monumental and that is a nice subject, and maybe we should look at these people a little bit more respectfully than we do now. So that was a very big part of what they were doing. Now, why did they do it? Well, the typical artist's sensitivity and sympathy for the poor people who are exploited by the rich. But there's an older connection, and that is that a lot of artists feel that they're very similar to workers. In other words, an artist is a kind of a laborer. He uses his hands, he uses tools, he uses materials, and that's exactly what a laborer does. A human being is making something. A human being is creating something out there. Now, this is a very traditional way of looking at artists and workers. And when a society has this view, it has a great deal of solidarity. It's not splitting people up, it's putting people together in a task. And the tasks that this view brought up were things like the Acropolis, things like medieval cathedrals. And in the Bible, they give nice accounts of the building of the Temple of Solomon, and the workers and the artists are all mentioned in the same paragraphs. So, you know, it's not as if they were doing art that was somehow less valuable. Those are some of the greatest artworks in the world. And a lot of it is coming out of that sense of solidarity in the community, that the community feels they're all in an enterprise together. And if you look at the fresco class in action, you just have to look at the t-shirts some of you are wearing. You see that none of those art students are wearing berets, okay? There's nothing fancy about them. What have they got? They've got tools, they've got, you know, little things to make an exact corner. They might as well be making a table as an artwork, okay? you know, they're craftsmen. They're using their hands. Now, we've been to France and now Mexico. And again, let me emphasize that in different contexts, workers are different, people are different, of course. And my father in the late 20s, around 1929, goes up to the United States. And it's a very different worker situation there. Now, Diego Rivera had something of the same experience when he went to Detroit. His ideas about workers and capitalism were pretty much developed in Mexico, somewhat in Europe, like my father's, but there was a whole other thing going on. And my father was very anxious to put his finger on what was there. Now, in Mexico, the workers were on the cusp between the world of native crafts and the world of modern industrial workers. And that's still true today. If you go to Mexico, you'll find that a lot of the stuff we do with machines, they're doing is handwork. And I rather like that, but it's definitely a problem for many. So my father comes to the US and he comes up against the most up-to-date industrial workers in the world. These guys are, you know, the cutting edge of construction. Now, where the Mexicans had been very low-tech, the US were very high-tech. They had all the latest machines, jackhammers, tools like that. Whereas the Mexicans were working on fairly small-scale projects, the New York workers, where my father was, were building huge numbers of skyscrapers. Now imagine a cubist walking from Europe, walking down the street and seeing the big skeleton of a skyscraper. You'd say, my God, they're putting a grid on the sky. You know, what's going to stop these people? You know, it's just, what are they doing here? So my father was extremely impressed. Next one. Now this is he did a number of things of workers in New York. And we unwrapped this once. It was in storage, and we were sitting on the floor in our house, and I unwrapped it and showed it to him, and he looked at it, and he looked at it, and he said, I know I was doing something really complicated here, but I can't remember what it was. Okay. And I thought that was very interesting because he wanted, you know, you look at those workers, you know, I mean, if you sit and observe these workers, it's amazing the number of tasks they're doing, and they're just moving around like a dance, and this person does this, which then gets connected over here, and, you know, it's like some overall mind is guiding them in the most amazing way, and then it's partly just the necessities of the job. This has to be straight, that has to be level. And so he, I think, was trying to do an especially complicated composition so that he could pay homage to these most impressive workers. Next one, please. Now this is another one from that series in New York, and you'll see that he did something very close to this here on the wall. He was fascinated by the idea of you can dig into the ground. See, an artist often thinks of, you know, the rectangle as a window on a box. But what if there's some little gremlin inside the box that's digging down into the base, you know? I mean, there goes your box. So it makes it an interesting thing how you can suggest that there's a hole there when the hole is actually supposed to be descending out the bottom of your frame. So again, it was as if he were inspired by the sights of work in New York to think outside of the frame, so to speak, to think in an entirely new way. Now, we go now to Hawaii, and he wants to do the same thing here, which is to show the work here, but show how it's different from the work anyplace else. It's the same and different in the same way. And the UPW mural is a magnificent sight. Okay, it's on a street. It's an enormous long front of a building. You can see it from close up on the sidewalk on this side. You can go to the sidewalk on the other. Also, you have to be able to see what it is as you drive by it. You have to be able to kind of look over there like that and not have an accident and say, oh yeah, they're digging in the ground up there. So, you know, that's a whole other moving viewer that modern art has to worry about. The other thing is that it was outside, so you couldn't use oils or fresco or things like that. The only thing that would really work would be tile. It's the only thing that will resist all the elements. Now, there are two ways of doing tile. One is called bisque, B-I-S-Q-U-E, which is what was done on the side. And there you cook your tile and then paint on it and then cook it again to harden the paint. And it's a very nice thing because you can see the brush strokes and stuff. But there's another way, which you put the color on the wet clay and then you fire that, and it's like a Japanese pot. And you can't see brush strokes. What you see are areas, but those areas have an intense color. So all along here, you can see that there are these intense, strong colors. The difficulty is it's hideously hard to do because each color has to be cooked at a certain temperature, and then you have to develop a plan because you might have 3 colors on a tile that will each need its own temperature and so on. And it was Izami Inimoto, the tile maker, who was the great help on this. But what you end up is a strong, vivid colors, outlines, and areas of color. Well, it took them 6 years to do it, and it was a lot of work. Steve Murin, who arranged the whole thing, said this was the best contract he'd ever argued for or arranged. My father figured he was being paid about 25 cents an hour. Okay, but artists do that kind of thing. Anyway, what was the subject? The subject was going to be the work of the UPW peoples. Now this you can see downstairs, it's sort of the audition tape. It's to show the board of the UPW what it would look like. And so the scale is a little bigger than what he used outside. It is a portrait. Mr. Santiago gave me the name of the man who's there. He's Ray Akawa. But it's a little bit more schematic, less individualized than the ones that he would use. And the reason he did was that the UPW people wanted to have their portraits on the wall. And there's actually a rather angry letter from one section of the UPW to the manager saying, how come we aren't on one of those panels? Okay, look at all we've done for the UPW and we aren't even being acknowledged here. So my father then started a whole series of portraits. Now there he is. He's about 77 there. Next one, please. And you'll recognize a lot of these people. I chose the photos. These are by Steve Murin it's from the first panel. Next, please. Next panel. Next one. Isn't she cute? And then my father took the dog and put it on somebody else's lap. Next one. See, artists are allowed to do things like that. Okay. Now this is the first panel. I'm a little confused. How much time? Okay. This is the first panel, and this is really my father saying what is special about Hawai'i unionism. Okay, and I mean, it's like having the songs, those beautiful songs at the beginning of this meeting. You know, how many unions are so tied into art as the UPW and the ILWU are here. I mean, that's something special, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So here, and I've seen this at the university when students protest, angry students get up and protest. Okay, bring out your guitars, let's dance the hula, you know, and that's their protest. And when I was involved at the Waiahole, there were some things, Waiahole, Waikane, I remember somebody from the mainland saying, these guys think protesting is writing a song, you know? And I mean, they couldn't figure this out, you know, but that is definitely, you know, what communicates to people here in Hawaii. People in Hawaii are very open to the arts, and here is basically a Hawaiian protest, and they're saying, we want to be happy. You don't have to say, I'm angry at you because of this. You're just saying, I'm unhappy and I'd rather be happy. So let's get this worked out. Now to show the, you know, the happiness, you see it's following the grid. See, that's the darling thing about these panels. They have their grid. The grid is already there. And so if you look at, for instance, the Marisol's Father Damien, you'll see that the statue is painted so it will fit all of its grids, okay? In other words, the grid tells the story. Okay, next one, please. Now, this is one of the angrier ones. Now, that's my mother, okay? And, yeah, and what she has done is put a dead pet into the pile, and that's a no-no. And she has been caught red-handed, and the man is very nicely telling her, please, no dead pets. And she is pointing, saying, I will bribe you with a case of Primo. Okay. And you can see it's morning. You know, she has been up. She's been waiting for them to come because she knew something would happen. And the tree gives the kind of back and forth, okay? It gives a little sense of the tension there. Okay, next one, please. Now, you can see that they were a little worried that maybe the normal viewer wouldn't see that this was a celebration of workers, so they wanted to have a sign so people could read it. But here you have something that's very like the one my father did in New York, including the nice little red thing. Now, what's curious about this is you're looking at it from way, way down, but he does it so it looks like you're looking down into the hole. Okay, that's the wonder of art. Okay, next one. Now this is the custodial workers and the cafeteria workers. And this school is filled with my father's grandchildren. And those are my two children in the very front, my daughter Priscilla and my son David. And then all the others are other grandchildren. So I figured he thought, if I'm being paid 25 cents an hour, I can at least do this. Okay, next one. Now this is, again, a very good example. You can see how he's using the grid. And he wants to play against the grid by saying, how many rounded flowing forms can we get to play against the grid? And we have this huge machine here, which isn't rounded and flowing. It's stamping those, you know, rounded flowing things down to try to make them flat, okay, like a good grid should be. So again, he's playing with it. Rounded, stiff rounded forms and rounded forms. And this is the kind, you know, it's like clean clothes, you take them out of the dryer, oh, I feel so good. So that's the feeling of this, and it contrasts with the next panel, which is the final panel. Okay, now this is obviously in Hawaii, but it is more like a mainland strike. Do you see that? On the left panel, we had a real Hawaiian strike, and here we have a real more mainland strike. And that is the way he wants us to think about labor in Hawaii, that unions, labor is something that's been brought in, it's been introduced, and Hawaiians sometimes go that way, but Hawaiians and Hawaii workers sometimes absorb it into a special Hawaiian way of doing things. So that in all of those panels you have both the modern introduced things and then the cultural religious values that we have from our various ancestors and friends of our ancestors here in Hawaii. And there in the middle, I call attention to him, the man with the white hair. That's a picture of Steve Mirren, who was the person who organized this whole thing. Okay, so we could have maybe questions or thoughts, please.
Tell us why your father left France to Mexico, then U.S., mainland to Hawaii. Was there a certain reason that made him do change locations?
Well, they were quite rich before, and in France, and then his father lost his mind at the beginning of the war. My father and his father were in Freiburg on the day the war broke out. They got the last train back to France, and on the way back, the father began to lose his mind, and so my father had to get him home. They got him in bed, and he died a few months later. And my father was terribly impractical, so they lived off selling their furniture and rugs and stuff. And when there was nothing left to sell, they said, well, maybe we should go live with our relatives in Mexico. Again, a very impractical decision. What were they thinking? Anyway, but things worked out. And then he went to the States because he was working for the Carnegie Institution at Chichen Itza. And he became one of the co-authors of the report. And he went up to Washington to work on that thing. And then we came to Hawaii in '49 just to do the mural at Bachman Hall. And after the summer was over, my father didn't have any place to go. And I said, well, would you like to teach here? He said, sure, I'll stay for a year or so. But, I do think that Hawaii was the perfect place for him to end his career. I think he loved it here. I think it taught him a lot.
Time for one question.
John, can you talk about the relationship between him and the Mexican muralists, Diego Rivera and Siqueiros?
Well, they were very good friends. There's a good book out by a woman named Tatiana Flores, and she goes through that first couple of years in Mexico. And it's hard to go back and, look back and say, what was it like to be on the ground back then? But it was a moment where you had all these great artists and then a whole bunch of really good secondary artists. And so that makes for a huge confusion. And so there was a lot of mixing and borrowing and all sorts of stuff. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and neither did my father. And so basically, they all kind of grew up together because though some of them were older and had bigger, earlier careers, none of them had done murals before. So they were all faced with this very difficult task. And so they struggled. And it was wonderful to see people working through those problems and the anguish of it and coming out with something that was so special. In other words, Diego starts doing kind of European things, beautiful women in gowns. I represent truth. I represent freedom. Okay, and then they ended up doing peasants, Zapatistas, okay, workers. And that was just so original. Who had thought of doing that before? Okay, yeah, no, it is. You can look at the history of art before and you won't find much to go that's like that. So it was a very creative moment. It was a real, like 3 or 4 waves hitting each other going, wow.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Really glad to see everybody here. So it's such an interesting mix of voices and perspectives, and so we're very excited about it and to have you here. I'm just going to sort of stick to this script because I had so much that I would like to say about you, but I think I'll just let you say it. So Adolph Reed Jr. is professor of political science at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of many books and articles, including Class Notes, Posing as Politics, and Other Thoughts on the American Scene, and a recent Harper's piece entitled Nothing Left, The Long, Slow Surrender of American Liberals. So you can hear in those titles, he's pretty critical, and yet he's been so active for so many years as well. So for the purposes of tonight's forum, I wanted to highlight that he is critical of cultural, nationalist, and even anti-racist politics if they have shed any grounding in class analysis. So these we might think of as identity politics, based on what one allegedly is rather than what one does. So the result is a politics that presents itself as radical while adhering in many ways to capitalist ideology. And Reed notes that we live under a regime now that is capable simultaneously of including Black people and Latinos, for example, even celebrating that inclusion as a fulfillment of democracy, while excluding poor people without a whimper of opposition. And so this is sort of the general notion of what happens when you jettison a class struggle focus in your politics. Further, he says, I'm increasingly convinced that the race line, or race politics, the race line is itself a class line, one that is entirely consistent with the neoliberal redefinition of equality and democracy. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Adolph Reed Jr.
Should I sit any place in particular? Here, right? Okay. Hi. Brothers and sisters, thank you for coming out. Thanks, and I'd like to thank David and Leslie and how am I doing here? And LaborFest, obviously the UPW and everyone else who's responsible for putting this event together. And you get me out here. It's obviously, well, it's not obviously. It's my first time in Hawaii. And and I'm quite happy to be here and to learn as much as I can. And I've been doing that since I've been here. Anyway, so I guess I'll start by saying probably the deadliest thing an academic can ever say, which is that I'm going to try to be brief. Because I would like to have us as a nice group here. I'd like to have us have some discussion. I think these are important questions for us to discuss. Complex. They're not, they're only complex because of stuff that comes out of the corporate media and the like that make things seem more complex than they sometimes are. So I've been going back and forth about what this talk should be, and I had an epiphany this afternoon that came partly from talking with Noel's class yesterday at the university. And what I'd like to do is to try something a little different. So it's kind of cheesy for me to come all the way out here to make guinea pigs out of the audience for a couple minutes, but you came. Because what I'd like to do is talk about class in American politics by talking about race, which seems kind of, and by trying to get at what I argue is not only counterproductive strategically, but wrong empirically and historically about this notion of a race-class tension or dichotomy or like an either-or. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to do is just say a little bit about what race is and what it isn't. And I guess I'll start by saying a couple of other qualifiers. First of all, and I'm just positing some things now that you can throw cabbages or whatever at me when we have the dialogical moment. Race, ethnicity, nationality, or nationhood are all just different words for the same thing, right? And they're, or rather, if by nationality one means anything more than the place where you live or the citizenship that you hold, they're really different words for the same thing. And this probably happens as much in Hawaii as it happens any place in the U.S. I know it happens a lot in South Louisiana, where the population is phenotypically ambiguous enough, right, that people will often stop wanting to ask, what nationality are you, right? And I assume that happens here when it's not, when that's not really what the question is, but it sort of is really what the question is, because they're all really the same thing. So I'm positing that. So when I say race, you can fill in ethnicity or your nationality, and I'll put another little piece of fat on the fire. You can also think either Sasquatch or unicorn, because just as there's no such thing as Sasquatch or a unicorn, there's no such thing as race that exists in the ways that we've historically thought about it, right? Because what is race considered to be? It's considered to be a naturally occurring population, right? That's defined by certain characteristics that have to do, and they're always broad, vague, and ambiguous, because they have to be, both strategically and because they don't exist, so you can't nail them down. But by sets of characteristics that exist in principle, that form a boundary around a population that occurs between the level of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is all of us, right, our one shared species, roughly 130,000 years or so old, and local breeding populations, like people who live on the other side of the hill, right, and they're all cousins and they all look alike. And races are supposed to be naturally occurring populations that exist somehow in between those. It's interesting that at the heyday, well, first I'll say when the heyday of the race idea is, that the way that we think about what races are or what race is now in the modern world really only began to take shape in the second half of the 19th century. I mean, the term was around earlier. The term was around, depending on how you, on the usage from 14th, 15th century, whatever. I mean, nobody was counting much then. But it didn't really even come to apply in a general way to specific populations linked to territory till late 18th century, early 19th century. And it's really only since the second half of the 19th century that it began to take on, the flavor of what I sometimes call like the, 3 to 5 basic food groups, right? The basic race groups, right? That are roughly linked to continents. And it really only became a firm presumption, theory, metric of significant human difference. And by significant human difference, I mean differences in that were ascribed to populations on the basis of who you supposedly are instead of what you do, that defined limits on their capacities. I should have thought to bring this. I thought about it, about 2 hours after he took off from Denver, and it was kind of too late to go back to Philadelphia to get it. But there's a really nice book on ethnicity and migration to Pittsburgh in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And in it is a chart that an industrial relations firm did in 1925 for a metal tubing company in Pittsburgh that's called a racial adaptability chart. And what the chart does is on the one axis lists like 36 races, because yes, In 1925, there were 36 races, when there weren't 63 races or 28 races. And then on the other axis, it lays out a number of job performances and conditions of work. Good at daytime work, good at nighttime work, good in the heat, good and cold, and it's color-coded, right, to tell you what each race was good at. And of course, like all that stuff, it's all bogus. I mean, I won't, maybe if I've talked a little longer, feel a little more comfortable with the group, I'll say the word that first popped in my head. But I'm not comfortable enough yet. And I'm not that close to the door, and I don't know my way to the airport. But it worked, or rather, it was true. It became true because it worked, and that's the beauty of a category like that. If you impose it, like all through, the literature of late 19th century immigration in the mainland. There's stories about how some labor recruiter gets the idea that people from a village in Sicily are good stonemasons. And then when people come here would come from Sicily, and the cousins would say, hey, look, I know you don't know anything about stonework, but just go tell them that you're from Catania, right? You'll get a job. And it works because it's true because it works, right? Like you impose it, and therefore it takes on the depth and the imperviousness of common sense knowledge, because common sense is the stuff that we know because we know it, right? Right, with no proof. And we hear it all the time, right? People will say, well, I don't care what those statistics say. I know immigrants are taking my job, right? So it's that kind of thing. All right. But just further to historicize or to periodize the race notion, because I think this is really important too, for reasons that will become clear briefly, shortly. That the heyday of the notion, that is a period when it was at its greatest power, right? When everybody in the world who counted, that wasn't really the bulk of us in this room at that point, but everybody in the world who counted was absolutely convinced that races are real, that races confer capacities and limits and capabilities and talents that live within the populations that are classified according to the races or to the racial taxonomies, was like roughly 1880, 1890 to 1940 or so, depending on where you were, right, in the world. If you're in the American South, I'd say it's a little more like 1960. If you were in Germany, a little more like 1945. But so just think about that for a second, right? Because people often, when we talk about race and racial difference and ancient racial hatreds, right, like Tutsis and Hutus, Serbs and Croats. Give me another one. The one that I know is real is Blue Devils and what I like to think of as human beings. So there is this rhetoric, right? This. I won't go on about this much, but in the or Catholics and Protestants, that's another one. But in the war with the breakup, or that the Germans instigated to break up the former Yugoslavia, the reportage was all about Serbs and Croats, ancient tribal hatreds, when in fact all of that stuff was rooted in the contemporary dynamics of political economy. But more importantly, though, when in conversations about race and the depth of race and racism and how race overwhelms class that recur within the American left since for all of my adult life, basically one way or another, the parallels that get drawn, right, are like just like Jim Crow, right? For instance, like the struggle against mass incarceration often, retails this claim that this is the new Jim Crow. Actually, there's a book, a very popular book by that title. People will often invoke slavery or the sharecrop system, and then say, it's as if nothing has changed, when in fact, the rhetorical force of the claim is proof that something has changed, because what the claim is, it is that, the claim is an effort to invalidate the contemporary practice by saying that it looks like something that we all long ago had rejected. It's as if nothing has changed, but it's, all right. But the point I'm trying to get at in this regard is that first of all, the race idea is historically specific. It came into existence at a certain moment in the history of the world, and in a moment, by the way, that was linked to political economy, right? The big three: the plantation economy, the European imperial experiment. When was the planters' uprising against the Queen in Hawaii? What year was that? Pray tell. Can anybody tell me? Anybody remember? Yeah, okay. And you learn today that there's a significant enough Puerto Rican population in Hawaii, and the U.S. jacked Puerto Rico in 1858. Anybody know what this is? No. Well, that's the Cuban flag, but they tried to jack us in 1898 too, so I know that very well. It looks a little like the Texan flag, but it was actually the Cuban annexationist flag, because in the 1850s, there was a movement in Cuba and a movement in the American South, because they knew the time was starting to run out on them for slavery, to annex Cuba to the American South as a slave state. So the annexationists lost, but the independistas liked the flag, so we kept the flag. Okay, but the point is, plantation economy and the slave trade, and the imperial experiment, and kind of a wild card factor, I guess, or one you can't read exactly out of economics, was the emergence of a new sort of class in the West, right? A new class of intellectuals, or a new petite bourgeoisie that came together around making a fetish out of expertise, science, taxonomizing stuff, right? And since intellectual life was dominated by upper class men, well, what could be more natural to a closed, commonsensical conversation among an upper class that they are where they are by nature, and that everybody else is where they are by nature, right? So it worked that way, and this is the moment then when race science was born. Now, this is the other bit of my story, and I promise I'm not going to go on for too long, because I really do want to have us talk about this stuff. That at this moment, at the moment when race science was born in the late 19th century and the turn of the 20th century, was also a moment in the West, and especially in the U.S., of great political insurgency. Also in a lot of Europe as well, from underneath, right? Working class struggles, right? Combined with floods of immigrants to fill the newly expanding mass industrial and workforce needs in the burgeoning factory system. And just to put another little wrinkle on this, one of the reasons, like a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment on the mainland, at least, is convinced that everybody in the world wants to come here because they like our French fries and the reruns with Heather Locklear on them or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that people don't necessarily want to leave if they have a reason that they like to stay where they are, And one of the things that happened was in the second half of the 19th century, American industrial and transportation and agricultural development in a symbiosis, right, like between the city of Chicago and those big empty states where they grow like wheat and and stuff, became so productive that that the U.S. was exporting cheap agricultural goods to Europe that knocked the bottom out of the agricultural economies. I mean, the U.S. was the China of the late 19th century. That knocked the bottom out of the agricultural economies in Southern and Eastern Europe, which kind of freed up. That's the way economists talk, right? It freed up people by giving them the spur of the fear of starvation to leave to go to Pittsburgh, right, and to Gary and to Cleveland. Well, Gary only after 1906, because there was no Gary before 1906. So there's this burgeoning industrial production on with new mass production factory techniques that needed workers, and we all work, and we know what it means to say that employers are having trouble finding workers, don't we? It means employers are having trouble finding workers whom they can pay as little as they'd like to pay, right? Because that's what they call productivity. So it's convenient that it knocks the bottom out of those economies. People are freed up to come here, and the labor recruiters go. And in fact, I mean, that's how the demographic characteristics of the Black American population shifted, because when World War I dried up access to Southern and Eastern European workers, then those same employers turned south to recruit blacks to places like Gary and Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, and Mexicans, for that matter, to the steel industry and in the packing houses. Okay, so at the same time, right, that the WASP upper classes who had run the cities like Boston and Philadelphia and New York and New Haven and whatnot without any cavil or dispute. I mean, they ran the cities like a Merchant Ivory movie, right? Like they were everyone sort of recognized them by acclamation as the better classes, and I know for those of you who've watched your 1930s movies, you know what I'm talking about, right? Because that was the ideal. So all of a sudden, all these people show up from Ireland and Italy and Poland and all kinds of other places that they ain't even thought about, right? And so there's first of all a question: well, are they really white, right? And this became a real issue, right? Up through the federal courts. In fact, one of my favorite cases is about a guy from Syria who, and really, I mean, nobody cared about the stipulation in the Constitution that you had to be white to become a real American until the end of the 19th century. Why? Well, because that's when race ideology, like I said a little while ago, was taking shape among elites as something that really mattered. I mean, that's how they could, justify subduing us, Filipinos, and like anybody else, right? In this funny status that we were all supposed to have, where we were being guided to, learn how to take care of ourselves, and all that kind of stuff, because we obviously weren't able to do it before they got here. But then once that happens, then like the stakes of being white get jacked up pretty significantly. And by and large, if you're a Swede or a German, it's okay unless you're a communist, and then it's a little different, or perhaps an anarchist. But maybe you were a little less white after all. But what do you do with people from the Levant, right? And shtetl Jews from the East. I mean, so what happens with them? Well, since as the first thing I said was that there is no such thing as race, that then there's no actual litmus test. It's got to be decided in the court. And there's this great case. The case I love is about a Syrian in California, I think, who wanted to prove he was white because he didn't want to be deported. I have other stories about that, but that's okay. So the judge, who was up on the race science of the day, said, well, what does it mean to be white, really? It's not enough to say that you look like a white person, because anybody really can look like a white person. I guess he'd been to Louisiana. So it's not that. And it can't just be that you come from Europe, because anybody could be born in Europe. So the judge determined that to be white meant that you had to that you had to descend from a population that originated in Europe and embraced European ideals. I don't know what that was. I don't know if it had anything to do with deodorant or underarm hair or soft cheese or what, and I mean, he didn't either, right? But it just sounded like it was a good enough thing, to get past the moment. But the real point there, and alas, I can never remember what happened to the Syrian. I should go look that up. But the real point there is that it was an important issue, and B, was based on absolutely nothing but complete arbitrariness. Okay, all right. So, and C is that the issue flares up and becomes a convenient discourse for an upper class that's feeling challenged from underneath, and unlike, I guess, the right wing in Venezuela and Brazil, which which took a long time to figure out that they can't just defeat the elected popular government by saying that it's opposed to rich people, because it took them a couple of elections, but they figured out how to count. So I mean, now they do other things. It's like corruption, this, that, and the other. The upper classes in the U.S. and in Europe and the UK, for that matter, and I'll say something about that in a second, thought that they had a better way to understand it, and I'm not suggesting that this was intentional or duplicitous, because that's not the way necessarily that ideology works. It's not the best way that it works. But what was fundamentally class antagonism got understood as a racial or a cultural one. Okay, and the notion took shape among northeastern upper classes of gentility, right? So it's not about, because you're in a democratic or a nominally, democratic society where everybody's supposed to be equal before the law. I mean, how do you finesse this? And you say, well, no, it's not about the citizenship status. Really, it's about, who's fit to rule and serve. And since all of the universities and all of the courts were run by the upper classes, they all shared the same common sense. So that, for instance, where this was a little clearer was in the American South in the late 19th century, right? The great populist insurgency of 1892 was crushed. And in North Carolina, a populist Republican fusion government won control of the state in 1894 and all of the major cities in the state, and it was interracial. And they were reelected in 1896 and had control of the state. They were crushed in the 1898 election by a combination of violence, intimidation, threats, theft. Because in those years, it was always an open question whether it was historically more accurate to characterize the Democratic Party as the above-ground wing of the KKK or the KKK as the provisional wing of the Democratic Party. So they crushed the populist insurgency, disfranchised 90% of the black vote, right? In the state of Louisiana, there were like 106,000 people who voted in the presidential election in 1896. There were fewer than 1,000 who voted in the presidential election in 1904. They also disfranchised between a quarter and a third of the white population, right? Depending on the state. And the effect of that was to shift the center of gravity of politics far enough to the right, which is what really, so I mean, you also hear, the South is culturally anti-union. The South is no more anti-union than any place else, but the big difference in politics on the mainland was that the working class was disfranchised from like 1900 until 1965. So the consolation prize, sort of, that white workers got was white supremacy. Now, I want to be clear what I'm not saying, right? Because there's a school of thought that talks about white skin privilege and, the possessive investment in whiteness. No, that's not the point. The point is that once blacks are taken out of the political equation, then there was no other working class population for whites to align with. And that meant that white workers had to find ways to articulate, to define and articulate their own political interests within the context that they found themselves in, right? And that was a context in which the upper classes said, okay, white supremacy has to be the rule of thumb, basically. All right. So now that's not an unfamiliar story, but what I would suggest on it that might be an unfamiliar wrinkle is a way to think about this. Because looked at from the perspective of the beginning of the 21st century, what that suggests is that a working class insurgency was defeated in the late 1890s, and what it got as a consolation prize was some version of culture, like in this case, white supremacy. All right, so I'm going to skip over the New Deal, which is what the Republicans would want to do anyway, and point to the second period of serious working class insurgency in the 20th century, which was a period at the end, after the end of World War II, right? In 1944, FDR enunciated the Second Bill of Rights, which was a social democratic document. In 1945, a full employment bill that would have made pursuit of real full employment the cornerstone of federal economic policy passed the U.S. Senate, and what was defeated in the House by an alliance of Republicans and Southern conservative Democrats. And then things began to the Murray-Dingell-Wagner Act that would have expanded the Social Security system to give us Medicare and national health insurance was what was defeated in 1946. In 1947, Taft-Hartley. How many people in the room are trade unionists? All right. Well, then if anybody doesn't know what Taft-Hartley is, you can tell them, right? Because that's when they really, stepped up their game to come after us. What do we get? See, what I've been arguing, and this is an argument I'm trying to push in a book that I've been describing now as the book formerly known as Obama Mania, because that's how it started out. But is that the big story isn't so much the defeats that we've incurred, right? We all know those, right? Especially those of us who've been around to live through some of them. The big story is the second best alternatives that we've been able to fashion in the wake of the defeats, right? So after World War II, we got a new way of thinking about opportunity for working people. And it's also, I've argued, culturalist, right? It's because it's rested on what the historian Robert Self has called homeowner populism, right? This whole thing with the individual home ownership as providing the foundation of something called upward mobility, which actually really worked over time to make the working class disappear into this amorphous kind of a middle class that the right was able to stoke to create a sense of shared interests, between a working class family that owns a house, on, say, a steelworker's income, and rich people, right? Over keeping taxes down, keeping property values up, and controlling threats that come in. A lot of people have talked about redlining and racial discrimination in housing, like this was an autonomous preference that's expressed by the working class. My dad, talking about the imposition of white supremacy after the defeat of populism. The liberal orthodoxy was that segregation was the victory of the white working class, right? Because they were the real racists, and the planters were really, they liked black people. But my dad would always say, gee, that's funny, right? Because wouldn't you think that if the working class in the South had taken power, that they'd want something a little more than segregation, right? That they might want a little economic redistribution, right? Or, voting rights for themselves or something. But that's also a part of the story, right? Because when FDR, when Congress passed the 1934 housing law now I feel like I'm getting academic, but I swear it'll just be a second. Until the 1934 Housing Act, the ideal, the American dream of individual home ownership was out of reach even for most so-called middle-class people, right? Because the standard practice in the residential real estate industry was you paid 50% down and paid off the balance in 5 to 10 years. You mentioned to me what your house cost. And your folks would have had to be named Trump, right? To get past that. So what the Housing Act did, what was it provided a federal subsidy to the real estate industry, right? Not really to homeowners, but to the real estate industry that permitted, because what we have in this country is trickle-down socialism. That made it practical for the real estate industry to start to offer 5 to 20% down payments and 20 to 30-year payoff periods. Okay, so that expands after World War II. We get more and more of that. But it's the real estate industry that under the administration of the FHA took control over setting the rules and regulations. Now, I'll go back to our earlier point about when was the heyday of the race idea? Well, it just happened to be in the same period when the real estate industry got control over setting up a system of hierarchical valuation in the grid. Ultimately, it doesn't really have to be anything in particular that distinguishes the value of that's assigned to different properties. But from the standpoint of the real estate industry, the only thing that matters is that there's a grid and that they control it. And since all of the upper class people who were in the position to make the rules about this shared a common sense that race was a fundamental characteristic of human difference, and that different races had natural aversions, then one of the characteristics or the criteria that went into real estate valuation was white exclusivity. Okay, so the value was what was held to be undercut if there are non-whites in the area. Well, that produces, if you turn to working people who are buying houses with the understanding that the funny money, or as they like to call it, equity, in the house is their hedge against penury in their old age, then it's not necessarily bigotry for them to get freaked out about what the people who've sold them the house and control the market say would undermine their property value. And in those cases, you can see like as much expression of bitter pornographic bigotry as you want to, but there's something else that's going on there as well. And my point with this is that this is one illustration of how the cultural or the second best victory that takes a cultural form that sort of segments one portion of the population against another winds up actually creating the conditions that undermine everybody. All right. The last one, and then I'm going to shut up about this, that there's something similar that happened in the mid-1960s, right? And that's the third insurgency. You know, after the victories of the civil rights movement, then the question was, well, I mean, what's next? And there were two ways forward. People like A. Philip Randolph from the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Bayard Rustin and others said, okay, well, we've defeated segregation, but the big problems that affect racial inequality now have to do with the economy and with the shriveling of the public sector, and we need to have a different kind of alliance that pushes for broad-based social investment and full employment. What we got, that approach was defeated. What we got was a war on poverty that sort of, with a combination of black power and a war on poverty that redefined economic equality as poverty, which doesn't have anything to do with economics, but has to do with culture, and with racism. So once again, this was another moment when a political insurgency, working class based, political insurgency was, I wouldn't say was on the threshold, but was a living historical possibility. And it was crushed, and what we got instead was a diversity and a multiculturalism. And that brings us to where we are now. And I think I've probably talked enough, so, no? Yeah. Okay, all right, well, and what's the trouble with diversity? Well, for one thing, I'll give you an illustration. My institution, which is an Ivy League institution, which means that we hire people from like 5 or 10 departments, and we admit graduate students from like 5 or 10 departments, and we admit undergraduate students, almost only from places where their parents have sent them to places that will produce the very high test scores that will get them into places, like that. So, and our president, who, by the way, was an SDS. I think everybody was an SDS. I'm surprised we didn't win, actually. But she's gung-ho diversity. But what diversity means is, in our case, for instance, we fight like hell against Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and maybe the University of Chicago and Stanford for the same pool of faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates. And that takes us back to the argument of my good friend and comrade, Walter Ben Michaels, who is both an English professor and an activist in the University of Illinois at Chicago Faculty Union, that the thing about diversity is that, as a metric of, and multiculturalism as the metric of social justice, is that you can have a society in which 1% of the population controls 90% of the stuff, but as long as 12% of that 1% is black, and it's half women, and 14% are Latino, and the appropriate numbers are gay or trans, whatever, then it's a just society. And, I think that most of us in this room don't find that would be enough, right, to satisfy our ideals and aspirations for ourselves and for other working people. Now to conclude, I want to bring this down to sort of brass tacks, politically. And I'm not, I didn't come here to make a stump speech, but I'll be happy to talk about the Sanders campaign if anyone wants to. But we have been facing now, right, for at least 20 years, right? Well, in fact, I'll take a step back. in the same principle as it's like not the defeat, that's the thing that does us in, but the compromise that consolidates. Reaganism didn't get consolidated until the Clinton presidency, right? It was Bill Clinton who eliminated the federal government's commitment to direct income support for the poor. It's Bill Clinton who eliminated the federal government's commitment to direct provision of housing for the poor, and moreover turned it around into federal commitment to destruction of low-income public housing. It was Bill Clinton who signed the Financial Services Modernization Act that repealed Glass-Steagall that since 1937 had kept a firewall between commercial and investment banking, and ensued first in the dot-com bust and like then that big one. It was Bill Clinton who signed the crime bill that imposed the racially racially invidious crack and powder cocaine distinction into federal law, and he signed another crime bill that quadrupled like the number of federal death penalty crimes. Okay. Finally, just to put the icing on the strychnine cake, the Clinton administration conducted just about as many overseas interventions, military interventions, as Reagan and the first Bush combined, and in 4 fewer years. We in the Labor Party always say to people, what more could a Republican have wanted than what they got from Bill Clinton? And then, and I guess I have to duck when I say this, considering where I am, but it was Obama that consolidated Clintonism. So they've established, the boundaries of the thinkable in American politics now. And we often say, you're talking about this about here too, that we as working people and progressives got more from Richard Nixon than we got from Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama combined. And it's certainly not because Nixon liked us, because he couldn't stand us at all. When Clinton would look in the mirror at 3 o'clock in the morning and have his crisis of conscience, he would probably think about how much he actually liked, the downtrodden, the workers, the people of color and whatnot. I mean, not Nixon, right? I mean, he just wanted us all gone. Gone is very clear about it. What was the difference? I mean, the difference was that our movements had enough social force that Richard Nixon had to respond to us, and the Democratic administration since then haven't. So here we are now. We have 2 parties, right? I mean, we always said, like in the Labor Party, that the bosses have 2 parties. We should have at least 1. But that's not on the agenda now. But but this is the fact that we need to face up to. That we have one party that's deeply, fundamentally, and unalterably committed to Wall Street and the financial sector, and is committed on moral grounds to diversity and to multiculturalism. And we have another party that's deeply, fundamentally, and unalterably committed to Wall Street and the financial sector, and deeply and earnestly, honestly opposed to multiculturalism and diversity. If those are the 2 choices, it's obvious. I can look around the room. I'm not blind. If those are the 2 choices, then there's no question that door number 1 is less bad for us overall than door number 2. And especially with the pack of Republicans who are running now, because they're all running. I mean, how about a round of applause for Scott Walker, by the way? Right, because they're all running to make 14B apply to the whole country, right? To make the United States a right-to-work country, basically, right? But it's kind of like the choice of having like a cheetah behind this door, hungry, and a cobra behind this door, hungry, right? But the real question should be, how about some better choices, right? And again, when I signed up to come out here, I wasn't working for the campaign, and so I didn't intend to come out here to make a stump speech. And no matter what you think about the Sanders campaign, the fact of the matter is that, and this is frankly what appeals to me about the campaign, we could talk about that too, is that we need to figure out a way to start building something different, right? I mean, to start building a political movement, right, from the ground up and from the top down, because that's how things have to get built, that is principally concerned with articulating and fighting for the interests of the vast majority of us in this country who either work for a living or who are expected to work for a living. Because the way things are going now, I mean, this is a public sector unit. This is an Ask Me Local, right? 1 or 2 more election cycles, there won't be public sector unions because there won't be a public sector. And the charge against public education is coming from the Democrats, right? I mean, they're out front on that, from Obama himself, Arnie Duncan, his basketball buddy, yeah, I'm from New Orleans, and there's not a public school left in the city of New Orleans, right? It's like 100% charter. And they're always talking about how this is the model for the rest of the country. And it's time for us, look, it's not easy, right? And I mean, I know there are a lot of long marches in this room too. I mean, people who are used to protracted struggle and have taken a long time to win stuff. Anybody in the labor movement knows that, right? And so the real challenge and the gospel that I really came out here to preach was that we need to start trying to build a politics that, if you can, you forgive the old Maoist slogan, that finds a way to unite the many to defeat the few. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Noel, where are you? You're supposed to be introducing next. Come up here, please. I'm sorry. What we're going to be doing is that we're going to be combining the questions and answers after the next panel because they're similar. They're similar in some dealings because they deal with labor and race. And Noel Kent will right now, he will be introducing Colleen Kelly, who's the daughter of John Teale, of who the next panel will be dedicated to. And because it'll be dealing with the unity of labor and the Hawaiian national movement and the kind of problems that arise and how we can maybe resolve them. But maybe, I don't know.
So this is Kelly. How many people remember him?
Mike, we need to get a mic.
He was quite a man. He was a teacher for many of us. Back in the mid '60s, when groups of us were organizing students at UH against the Vietnam War, he sort of took us in hand, and he really taught us how to become much more effective organizers. He was a real mentor. He worked for this union for a while. I won't tell you how that ended, since we're in this building right now. But he was a person who was tremendously resilient, and whenever he was defeated or whenever he was fired from various jobs because of his political activity, he rose to the occasion and he became even more effective of an organizer. We owe many of the surfing sites and the swimming places that we have in Hawaii today were saved by Save Our Surf, which he organized too. So he was a person deeply invested in the environment, deeply invested in labor politics. He was there at Waiahole Waikani back in '75. Wherever we were and wherever we needed him, he was there, and he was strong and he was indomitable and courageous. So I'd like to, we decided to basically dedicate this event to John Kelly. And he passed a few years ago, and we thought it would be very appropriate to dedicate it to him. And we have his daughter, Colleen, former hospital worker, also celloist of note, political activist for many years, just to say a few words about John and his vision of the world. So this is Colleen Kelly, everybody.
Being that he was so out in front all my growing up years, I was a backseat person and not with the crowds. So, one thing that he doesn't get talked about much is his music. He started in Pearl Harbor. He went from there to college, a music college over on the East Coast. And then he started his civil rights activity and stuff over there. He came home, he pursued the music, Palama Settlement Music Department. We were little then. And he stuck us in the children's chorus, directed by him, to sing Korean songs, Filipino songs, Chinese, Japanese, Hawaiian, all the rest. Things like Leron, Leron Sinta, Buko ng Papaya, or like Arirang, Arirang, Ariro, all these things. We didn't understand what we were doing except that it was fun. And we had all these different cultures in Kalihi that were part of us, and we could sing their songs. It was just so groovy. And then came, of course, this big festival of music that he did at the Shell involving all these cultural events, and of course, exchanging music with musicians in Russia, in the Soviet Union then, and premiering a Shostakovich, post-war Shostakovich number here at the Shell, involving the symphony and the Kowloon Community Chorus, and having Moscow premiere Lonesome Train. I mean, it was awesome. That's where his music was. That's where his heart was. And of course, he evolved like everybody else. He was deathly afraid of nuclear war, and that's where understanding other people's culture came in. We can't consider them an enemy if we knew their songs and their culture. No. And, you know, starting at Pearl Harbor and moving into attending the peace conferences in Japan, the anti-ANH bomb conferences in the late 50s and 60s, and learning everything that he learned from them. Oh, we've got to get together. We've got to organize. We've got to educate. We've got to do what I did with sharks. We can't turn our back on danger. Can't. We'll be dead. So that's the kind of papa he was. He was really full of color and determination and nifty. That word.
Thank you, Colleen.
You guys take the details, okay?
Anyway, we're glad you're all here. It's very difficult to bring together, I think, labor activists and Hawaiian activists to discuss possibilities for unity, how we can work together. Labor, we face the same problems. We're fighting the same enemies and monstrosities as the Hawaiian movement. And the Hawaiian movement is surely growing, and it's something to contend with and something to understand. And we have here with us tonight Eric Gill from the Local 5 Hotel Workers Union, right over here to my left. And to our right, we have Native Hawaiian, Aloha Aina warrior. We're very happy to have him, Andre Perez. This kind of discussion hasn't been taking place before, so this is the beginning, and we need this. My roots are in both struggles. I support both movements. And John Kelly always used to tell me, we cannot win and make social change in Hawaii unless we have the movement of workers, a fighting movement of working people, and a fighting movement of Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiians working together and fighting for the common good. So brothers, please come up. And we're going to start off with Andre. Andre's going to talk. You know, he was told about this thing a couple of months ago, just like Eric. So they're ready. Brother Andre going first. You can sit down any place.
Oh yeah, you can sit close to him. my kako. Aloha. My name is Andre Perez. I'm from Koloa, Kauai. I'd like to point out that I'm not only Kanaka Maoli, I also come from Chicano background. My father's from Oakland, California, and him and his brothers worked with Cesar Chavez, Chicano Revolutionary Party, and the Black Panthers, and American Indian Movement. And I only learned this stuff not too long ago. One of my uncles was early member of the Venceremos Brigade, where they went to Cuba, met with Fidel, Che. I'm also Puerto Rican. My mother's side, who's Kanaka Maoli as well. We know the connection of Puerto Ricans to immigrants here in Hawaii and labor, plantation workers. And I've also been fortunate to travel to Puerto Rico and meet with the independence movement there as well. Currently, I'm a grad student at UH Manoa, Hawaiian Studies, working on a master's. And I consider myself, I guess, an activist who happens to be a student. My heart is in social justice and activism and human rights. So, just for the sake of time, how much time do I got? 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
We'll give you 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, I can get through most of this. I want to start off by acknowledging John Kelly as one of the greatest organizers in Hawaii has ever known. And I never got the I never got the opportunity to meet John Kelly, but I got the opportunity to work with his wife, Marion. Many meetings at Kekuni Blaisdell's house, Kapa Kaukau, and we got to organize, and I was there when she passed the torch off to us for La Ho'i Ho'i Ea and the checkbook for Kapa Kaukau with friends Kili'i and Shannon Collier. We teach workshops on Hawaiian activism. And one of the key components that I've included in our training is a very important quote and principle from John Kelly that I learned from Terry right here. John's saying of hang tight, hang loose. You know? Hang tight on principles, hang loose on tactics. And it's a really important activist organizing principle. Stay principled, but never lock yourself in from what's effective and what works. I want to start off really just by laying out a basic Hawaiian fundamental value and breaking it down a little bit because it's so prevalent right now. It's so prevalent that we see it on McDonald's cups right now. Aloha Aina, yeah? Aloha Aina, which is oftentimes on the surface interpreted as love for the land, which is correct. Aloha Aina, yeah? Love for the land. But if we look to our history, Hawaiian history, and we follow the trail, the usage and the context of the term back, we see very different contexts over time. One of the most important ones is at the time of 1897, the resistance after the overthrow. Aloha Aina became the call of the people, the supporters of the Queen, yeah, the loyalists. They would say Aloha Aina. And that was the slogan, the call to the Hawaiian patriots, you know, loyal to the Queen and our country. And then you see usage in the term, in a little addition in there, Aloha Aina Oya I'o. Oya I'o means truth, true. And we said the true Hawaiian patriots. And I've always wondered why that was an addition in there. But then I read her biography, Lili'u, and she has a chapter called Pseudo-Hawaiians. And I thought maybe that's why we have Aloha Aina, Oya I'o, yeah, to differentiate. And then we can also follow Aloha Aina back even further to Hawaiian understandings of our cosmogony, our story of who we come from, who we are, how we came to be. One of our stories of Papa and Wakea, Wakea, Sky Father, Papa, Earth Mother. And in that story, Wakea mates with his daughter, Ho'ohoku Kalani, and they produce a stillborn offspring, and that offspring is buried in the ground. And from where that offspring, the dead fetus of the child sprouts forth the kalo, the taro plant. Yeah. And it's after that another child is born that becomes sort of the progenitor of the Hawaiian people. And it's through that mo'olelo, through that story, that our understandings of our connection to the land and our relationship with the land is remembered and is honored through our interaction and treatment of the land, with the land, as part of the land. We also have sayings. When we die, when we pass away, there's a saying, ho'i kalepo I kalepo. Let the soil return to the soil. We also have another cosmogony chant, the Kumuhonua, that talks about us coming out of the land at Mokapu. So all these stories really tie in this sense of Aloha Aina as a very fabric of our identity, that we come from the land. And it's through that understanding that we always put the land as the highest priority in everything that we do. So with that understanding, I think it's a good driving force for this discussion. When Ray asked me to talk about the connection between labor and Hawaiians, I had to think a little bit, but it wasn't hard to find common roots, yeah, to look at what binds us together. And one is the fact that almost all of us Hawaiians today are descendants of immigrant workers as well, including myself. And we have common roots in that we come from oppressed peoples. Early days of workers organizing and unions is rooted in basic rights of equality and social justice. Women's rights, immigrants' rights are all part of an intersection with Hawaiian rights. And we all struggle together. And of course, I would say if we understand what Aloha Aina means, that we put the land first and the health of the land first, then I would say that Aloha Aina and capitalism are incompatible. So for me, speaking on Hawaiians, I just want to tell a story. I recently, last year, I went to Maui, where they have a really organized GMO network, I would say, very organized. I was impressed. And I went out there to participate in a sort of a summit of different GMO groups. And they had a professional facilitator from California. And they were so organized, they started digging right into the issues. Okay, what do we got? What's the issues that we need to tackle this year? Access rights, land, pesticides, water, blah, going through this list. And I raised my hand and I said, all of those rights that you're talking about, all those issues are Hawaiian issues. How's about we start off with connecting the GMO movement with the Hawaiian movement? Because there's a powerful parallel and intersection there. And if we really want to be strong, we should work together. And at that time, I have to admit, I was very guilty of being insular and working only within the Hawaiian movement and not going too far out into other struggles and other diverse, or as we say, working with the haules. Yeah. And me and my good friend, one of our premier Hawaiian intellectuals, Kalekoa Ka'eo, were there. He piggybacked and came with me, and we didn't want to leave because the level of discussion was so important and so akamai, so smart, so intense. And we realized, wow, these guys got their stuff together. We should work together and learn from them and share with them. But what ended up happening in that conversation was the facilitator, who was really good, stopped when I said that these are all Hawaiian issues. What's your connection to the Hawaiian community as you try to tackle these issues? He stopped and he looked around and he said, he's right, and he erased everything off the board and he wrote Hawaiian community relationships. And that entire GMO group, there must have been about 50 people in that room who were representing many of the different GMO groups, and there's a lot. They unanimously agreed that one of the first steps they wanted to do was build bridges with the Hawaiian community, understand our struggle, understand our sovereignty struggle, and understand the various Hawaiian rights that we're struggling for. And so one of the first things we did was we started to begin workshops using a curriculum that we developed called AIA, and start to make the connection between Hawaiian struggles. Many of which the stories that we told include John Kelly. I'm here really to talk about how we can do that with labor. And looking at the commonalities that we have, understanding the strength that we get through our unity and supporting each other, understanding that bridge building starts with just talking, but more important with listening. And look at the obstacles that separate us. Yeah, and of course, probably one of the biggest obstacles between Hawaiians and Aloha Aina would be probably development and jobs. You know, and how do we begin to attempt to reconcile that? And to be honest, I was one of the biggest projects right now creating jobs is the rail project. And I was very much against it, very much against it. And I live in Pearl City, so I drive through rail construction every single day and night. And when I drive on that, right now they're doing all utilities along the highway, just upgrading all the utilities. And as I drive down the highway, I see mostly Hawaiians working in Local 365 labor union. And it makes me realize that as much as we want Aloha Aina, as much as we need to protect our land and to hold on to our identity, we're always subject to the necessity of survival in this economy in Hawaii. And so it's not easy. But I think the fact that I'm here talking and attempting to introduce ourselves to each other is the first step. And I want to really talk about a couple of things. Well, actually, I got one thing I want to talk about. And I'm going to go a little bit off track, but it's so important. One thing that's going to bind us together, whether we like it or not, is climate change. And it's happening right now. 2015 is seen as the year that it all went down. The most drastic changes, and we all feel it every day right now, hottest summers. One of the most important studies right now on climate change came out of UH Manoa right here with a professor or a researcher. The last name is Mora, M-O-R-A. And I would really encourage all of you to Google Mora, M-O-R-A, climate change, and read his articles. Climate change means that we're going to experience drastic weather patterns, hot, cold, storms. Look how many storms we've had so far. The temperature increase by 2050 is projected between 2 and 7 degrees. His study has been vetted by many scholars, and they might have minor disagreements with him, but they agree that it's something that's really important and that it's happening. Temperature increase by 2-3 degrees means a lot of coral is going to die. A lot of coral dies, fish, we have no ecosystem in the ocean. But what's also important is temperature, sea rising combined with temperature increase means not only rising, but water expands with heat, which means we're going to see places like Waikiki with the computer model will be underwater, 10-foot increase. By 2060, they're saying that New York, London, Paris will be uninhabitable. And that it's too late to reverse the climate change. We're beyond the tipping point. It's too late. What we can do, if we got emissions under control today, we might be able to prolong it by 20 years. One of the first places to experience climate change is Honolulu. But 2047 is predicted as the departure point for the planet. And what he says is by that point, we're going to have three choices. Either move to cooler climates, adapt, or become extinct. It's really scary. I'm hoping I'll be alive in 2047, but I wonder if I'm going to want to be alive at that time. And more importantly, I worry about my kids. My son here is 7 years old, and he's going to live in this time. The reason I'm bringing this up because climate change is something that we can connect to labor, to development, to industry, to capitalism. And so how do we take one of the most important issues on the planet, maybe in human history, and begin to use that as a catalyst to work together? Mahalo.
Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. Please excuse me in advance. I started bargaining at 6 p.m. last night and came straight here from there. We didn't get the deal done, so we got to go back after this. I did, however, tell him that I promised Ray I would show up, so we had a hard stop. And so, because as much as I want to deliver a contract, I don't want that guy talking about me not showing up. He will tell everybody everything, and that's what I love about Brother Ray. I did know John Kelly, and John Kelly recruited me to the movement when I was 13, and I joined Save Our Surf as a Stevenson School student, and that started me on my personal road. So John was a great asset to our nation, and he's quite a guy. He used to always do this to me, make sure that I was lifting weights and stuff. Before he'd print off some flyers for me, we had to go jump off the rock and take a swim and do that. But you know, John was also a guy who was a great communicator. He talked to a lot of people and communicated a lot of ideas. So I'm honored to be here in his honor, and I just got to say, I miss him. I'm Hawai'i. I learned a joke years ago that struck me true, and I have a hard time saying it in the presence of young people, but it was like, how do you tell an effing Hawai'i from a Hawai'i? And the answer is, call him Hawai'i, and if he gets upset, that's an effing Hawai'i. And I'm proud to be a Hawai'i, and in fact, I have a card from Bumpy that says I'm a Kanaka Hawai'i. So, but what I am is born and raised here. I'm third generation here. I'm a born and raised citizen of this nation, and we are a nation here in Hawaii. We've always been a nation, and our trouble as a nation is very similar to what I heard our guest speaker speak of in regards to the class. You know, Lenin said the task of the working class, in essence, if it wants to take appropriate power in our society, is to move from being a class in itself to being a class for itself. In other words, to be conscious that we are a working class, and that consciousness overcomes the racial divisions and all those other things, you know, between ethnic groups, between men and women, between straight and gay, all the things they use to divide workers are overcome when workers recognize first and foremost that we are a class, meaning we have a common economic interest, and therefore we have every reason to overcome these divisions. Without that consciousness, who's going to do the hard work? So the working class is unaware, as we heard in the earlier speech, right? White workers identify with rich white guys instead of workers of color in many cases, and that's not an accident. It was promoted and developed, and the theory of Aryan master race was a tool that was used to justify the systematic enslavement of all the other peoples. And the Europeans got steel and gunpowder first, and they stole a march on everybody, and that march has started to dwindle as the rest of the world's people have caught up, I should say. So we're a class in itself. We need to become a class for itself, and that's equally true of us as a nation. We are a nation. We have a common economic interest. We have been colonized and occupied, and we don't remember our history enough to become a nation for itself. And that's not an accident either. That was consciously done, and it was done through soft tactics like education and hard tactics like direct, brutal exploitation and repression. So the Hawaiian nation is a nation, and it's not an ethnic group. I agree that races are a group of this kind. A nation is a group, a community of people that have a common economic interest because of their community interaction. And we are a nation. And we've always been a nation. When Queen Lili'u was overthrown, like to differ with you, brother, she wasn't overthrown by the sugar planters. She was overthrown by 13 American non-Hawaiian citizens with the connivance of the American minister and by the efforts of a marine company with artillery and machine guns. And the Queen had every ability to defeat that company of Marines. She had 1,000 fighting men under arms within half a mile. She chose not to, and we can all debate whether she was right or wrong, but she made that choice. So she chose to rely instead on diplomacy, as King Kamehameha III relied successfully on diplomacy when the British took over, and he sent people off to Washington, D.C. and other capitals and united a coalition of foreign governments to help pressure the British, and they gave it back. So the Queen had every good reason to believe that she could accomplish the same when America took over, and she came very close. The word imperialism is a word coined by the Democrats in Congress in the 4-year debate over Hawaiian annexation. And at one point, the majority party and the president had committed to restore the Queen. It was a close thing. The American people did not like becoming an imperialist power. They had just thrown off colonialism with the British. And the American tradition was very much against overthrowing friendly foreign governments that did you no harm. So the Queen had every reason to believe she could be successful through peaceful means of diplomacy, and she chose not to create a bloodbath because she could have slaughtered that entire Marine company. And of course, then the USS Boston would have shelled the town, and in a couple months, 10 more battleships would have shown up, and a lot of people would have got killed, and she took the long view on this. So she was overthrown, but it wasn't until after Hawaii had already become a very multiracial, multi-ethnic nation. Hawaiian people, like other indigenous people, were killed in very large numbers, high percentage, by diseases introduced and by economic dislocation that helped breed the disease. 90% plus of Hawaiians were died. Huge tracts of land, all the lo'is, all the fields that 1,000 years of hard Hawaiian labor had created at great cost were being overgrown and destroyed. And Kalakaua went around the world, the first sitting monarch to circumnavigate the world, meaning the only king in the world who felt secure enough on his throne to disappear for 2 years. And he had confidence he would have his throne when he came back because the Hawaiian kings had created the monarchy had created a real nation. And so the planters actually did not support the overthrow of the queen. They were neutral at best. They were doing just fine. Kalakaua went around the world to recruit people to come and put our land back into production and create an economy again and create a strong enough nation to withstand the onslaught of foreign colonialism. And he conned the plantation owners into financing the trip because they needed people to work on the plantations. And so they paid for the trip, and along the way, he met with every single crowned head and president and head of state in every major country and achieved recognition from all those countries and treaties for the nation of Hawaii, including America, which had treaties that it broke in invading and annexing Hawaii. So we've always been a nation, and we've always been a multi-ethnic nation. After Hawaii moved from a chiefdom to a modern nation, that was done with the assistance and direct help and conscious recruitment. You know, Kamehameha married one of his daughters to John Young. He knew how to get a haole that's loyal. Marry him off to your daughter, make him a chief. He didn't do that because he wanted a haole son-in-law. He did that. He did that for the nation. So his son recruited the likes of Wiley, Dr. Judd. Later, Kamehameha's recruited haulis from different countries to play off against each other. Charles de Varigny, the finance minister under Lot and Alexander Liho, very, very modern, forward-thinking economic policy. They consciously promoted the plantations to repopulate the land, create investment capital so that they could create a nation. And they recruited smart, loyal haulis to do it. By Kalakaua's time, he got Walter Murray Gibson, which was a little more of a mixed blessing. But they all did it, and they did it on purpose, and they did it because they needed the skilled help, and they included those people in the nation to secure their loyalty, and the Hawaiian nation was built, not by Hawaiians alone, but by haulis as well. And all the other people that came since have built our community into what it is. We are a nation of many races, but we're a nation that Hawaiian people created. And we're a nation that rightly has a right to go back to the Constitution that was displaced. Under international law, we can go back to the Constitution that was displaced by force. And in fact, that, in my opinion, would be the Constitution of 1860, Lot's Constitution, which had a very strong monarchy, a very strong king. It put a lot of powers in the king. Those powers were taken away by the Bayonet Constitution when Kalakaua was basically hijacked, and he had to sign the thing under duress, under threat of rebellion. And it was that Constitution that Lili'u was trying to restore when they overthrew her to prevent that. Right? The 1860 Constitution, she was trying to put that one back in and get rid of the Bayonet Constitution. So America didn't overthrow Hawaii because Hawaii was weak and Hawaii was getting weaker and needed protection. America overthrew Hawaii because Hawaii was getting stronger and more self-reliant and more having an ability. We are the nation that was the last nation to fall in the Pacific Rim. The Hawaiian Renaissance, the Great Mahele, I used to have nice arguments with John Kelly about the Great Mahele. Some of you probably have too. But that preceded the Meiji Restoration in Japan, when it was basically the same thing. You know, he created private property to attract industrial capital to create a modern nation with money in exchange. The Hawaiians had land in those days. There were so few of them left. There's plenty of land, but nobody had money to buy anything. So how are you going to have an economy if nobody has any money to buy anything? So they did a great job building a multi-ethnic nation. But the queen was overthrown. So the national movement and a note on Ke Aloha Aina. That is the newspaper of Robert Wilcox and his partner, what is his first name? Bush. And they were both Hapahaole scions. But it says there, Ke Aloha Aina, the translation, the patriot. That word didn't mean in those days an abstract love of the land. It meant patriotism. It meant resistance to outside control. It specifically supporting the Queen against American overthrow. Robert Wilcox, after the Queen abdicated to save his life and the life of many others, including Haoles like Sam Gulick, who bought the 1,000 rifles in San Francisco and brought them in, that Wilcox led a rebellion that was financed by a Haole guy who was sentenced to death. The Queen abdicated to save him, and no, I can't. But anyway, I've been talking about the nation, not about labor. But we've always been a multi-ethnic nation, and we've also always been a nation of working people, hard-working people. I go to a lot of places around. There's no place in this country that I've been where people work harder than here. My members work 3 jobs. Many of them work 3 jobs. Probably most of them work 2 jobs. So people work here from dawn to dark. And we're a very hardworking community, always have been from the plantation days to now. And the labor movement was the successor to Wilcox. Wilcox, after he was freed and under the conditions of annexation, he led he became the delegate to Congress for 20 years. Yeah, he led the Home Rule Party. And they passed cute things like, all business shall be conducted in Hawaiian. A great boon to the Hawaiians who were getting ripped off because they couldn't read the documents that were being signed, but that didn't stick. But he served in Congress for 20 years until they assassinated him in a most disgusting way. But after he left, what happened? Kuhio, Koananakoa, they became part of the new colonial elite, Republicans and Democrats, right? So where did Hawaiians that wanted to fight for the nation go? Where did they go? Where did Hawaiian leaders go? And from 1920 all the way to the 70s, when you see Hawaiians standing up and fighting, they fought in unions. It's no accident that the guy that runs this union is Hawaiian. And it's no accident that many of our unions are run by Hawaiians. And it's no accident that Hawaiians were absolutely essential in the development and the sacrifice from the Hilo massacre to all the other things that were done to create a new society that working people could have a fair share in. Those were led by Hawaiians. The Hawaiian movement for that 50-year period was a union movement. And the Hawaiians led that movement and led it out of the ethnic union that existed, the ethnic unions. We had Chinese unions, Japanese unions, Filipino unions. Nobody ever won while you had an ethnic union. So they created industrial unions where all the workers were in there. And if you want to get people together and you want to demonstrate that they have common cause and they have a reason to be together, and you get them into a fight against oppression together, that's how you get people together. That's how our members have created a strong union. There's no shortage of distrust between our Filipino members and our locals. There's plenty of reasons why people bite each other. But when they're on the picket line fighting, they're together and they appreciate each other and they come out stronger and better for it. The union's better for it. Our nation is better for it. If you want to unite our people, you build unions. And if you want our nation to have the tools to resist the exploitation of global capital, which is truly global. We're dealing with Blackstone. They don't have a country. They don't care what country they're in. They don't have a nation. They exploit all nations, including America. Right? They're trying to push American standards down to the standards of other countries instead of helping other countries reach what American people had such a hard and long fight to reach. So unions are essential to any nation. They're essential to our nation right now, even though we don't have our nation back officially. But if if Hawaii's people are going to get a fair deal from Blackstone, who's buying and selling hotels and basically taking everything they can get, taking our beaches, taking our economy, if we're going to have any defense against them, we better have strong unions. I'm proud that our union has been able to pull money out of their jaws and put it into our community by putting it into our members' pocket. That's the role we play. That's the role unions play. Now, not all unions are conscious of their role. And not all union leaders are conscious of their role. I freely admit that. It's a frustrating fact of my life. But the fact is, a union is an organization of working people. It's how working people unite together to add their power together so they can create enough power to stand off the power of the boss, the power of the money. And it's no accident that they happen to be anti-union too. The bosses in this town happen to be anti-union too. They say they're for unions. All the union leaders in the room, there's a few of us left. When was the last time the government did anything for us? So we have to have strong unions. Our unions have to be conscious of their role as organizations of workers, and we have to build the consciousness that they have to have the role as defender of our nation. And we don't have to find ways to bring these together. We are together. 1/3 of my executive board are Hawaiian people. That's a bigger percentage than in my membership, right? Because we have more Hawaiian leaders proportionally than the population percentage. So the fact is, Hawaiians are in our unions are in the nation. We're already mixed up together. Our interests are aligned. What we got to do is get it that we need to become a class for itself, a nation for itself, and appreciate each other and build what the kings were doing. I think the modern Hawaiian movement, if you will, has taken a left turn into the weeds. And I don't mean that to say that I don't support what Hawaiian people are fighting for. I mean to say that Hawaiians have a role that nobody else can do here in our nation. They have something they can do that nobody else can do. They can crown a monarch. And just think what that monarch could do, recognized or not. That monarch could appoint a Supreme Court and have that Supreme Court appoint a board of trustees for the Bishop Estate, because Princess Pauahi did not have a will that said, by the way, the appellate court of the state of Hawaii shall pick my trustees. Said the Supreme Court of the nation of Hawaii shall. So that claim to the Bishop Estate, control of the Bishop Estate lands, which are the Kamehameha lands, is solid if Hawaiians can do the one thing that nobody seems to be able to get to, which is actually agree on who should be a monarch. Another thing they can do is file suit in U.S. federal court. Under the Supreme Court of the United States decision in 1917, the Supreme Court said, no, Lili'u, you don't get the Crown lands because you abdicated. The Crown lands became the ceded lands, now controlled by the state, airports sitting on it, prisons, everything. But those are Crown lands. And the Supreme Court said, you don't get it because you're not the sitting monarch, Lili'u. Well, guess what? We can crown another one. And we should. So thank you. Before the hook comes.
So we have about 10 minutes or so for questions and answers, right? Yeah, go ahead, questions, go ahead. That's the real boss. Go ahead, Sam. Okay.
A very good discussion. When I was hearing all this discussion about lawsuits, and everybody probably heard about the ACLU lawsuit against the city, about the homeless, law of splinter paddle. You know, it's a Hawaiian issue. It's a worker issue. It's talking about jobs. It's talking about what is a living wage. You know, anybody that rents in Hawaii is basically houseless. He'll become homeless in a month, basically. So we're in a situation where our politicians are basically all landowners. They're all real estate agents, are lawyers, and they control this island by the rents and the military. I'm just going to throw it out there. I think that's something the union should get involved in because of the issue of wages. The city and county and the state won't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. They should, because that's what you need to actually have a living wage in Hawaii.
I guess that's mine. I guess that's mine, since it was addressed to the union guys. Look, just so happens our union is heavily involved, and we have created for the purpose of organizing our nation's people who don't belong to my union in alliance with us. We've been looking for allies so long and having a hard time finding them, we decided we had to create one. So the IKEA movement is taking up housing, and it is not some peripheral interest. We just delivered this past summer the biggest raise our members have seen in the hotels, $1.01 per hour. That's the raise. That's $173 a month for a full-time worker. But what's happening now is the tech giants, the tech monopolists, like Brian Chesky, have created these Airbnb, this so-called sharing economy, and what they're doing is they're helping and encouraging and abetting people taking their houses out of the local supply and turning them into illegal hotels in our neighborhoods, compromising our zoning laws, compromising our neighborhoods, undermining our children's environment, and killing our jobs, our hotel jobs. But it's all illegal. But Airbnb is doing that. Airbnb went from 2,000 units to 70,000 units on the island of Manhattan in 2 years. That's the exponential growth of this, because the money is there and people are going to follow the money. So we are taking the position, look, I'm no housing expert, but I'm learning. We can build housing. We have record low interest rates. The government could be taking advantage of that, issuing some bonds, building some housing, finding a way to subsidize it by holding up permits for the likes of PacRep building a new Ritz. They're going to make $1 billion off that building. Why don't we carve off 10, 15, 20, 50 million for us and put it into the housing market, help us build housing. We can do that if our politicians have the will to defend our lands and not let our lands, our one asset here really is our real estate, go for cheap. So we can build housing, but it's no sense building housing or passing ADU type stuff if you don't stop that housing from becoming an illegal rental the next day. So we have to first stop the bleeding. We have to wrap our arms around this. We have to stop losing what we got before we can build what we need. And there's a lot more to be said, but yes, we're on it.
Andrea, I really appreciate your bringing up climate change, which is something that politicians and everybody else tends to ignore here. But I think that represents a fatal threat to the tourism industry. It represents a threat to our economy. What do you think about Hawaii as a place that feeds itself, is self-sufficient agriculturally, and also is self-sufficient in terms of energy? Do we need to go there? What's your take on all this?
Well, I think it was Marion Kelly who did a groundbreaking paper on product intensification, Hawaiian food production, utilizing the Liko, the Teale system, and Hawaiian fish ponds. So I think there's no question that we have to focus on that and fight for that. I think I read recently in real general numbers, I believe it was around the 1920s, 80% of food was produced here, 20% was imported. Now it's flipped. 80% is imported, only 20 produced. One of the, we're always in this quandary course, we're talking about housing. One of the big issues with housing right now is Ho'opili, that project that they want to build over some of our prime agricultural lands. I don't know how to reconcile that, but I do know that I think protecting our prime agricultural lands is probably a very important thing to do right now. One thing that I think about in a Hawaiian context is we look at the statistics of homeless in Hawaii. I think it's about 40% are Native Hawaiians, right around there. There's a lot of land available still. And so I think that if we could struggle, and I like the idea of restoring the monarchy. I didn't know this was going to be that radical of a meeting.
I've been waiting a long time for that speech.
I guess I'm kind of an amateur when it comes to this guy. I came in soft and thought, oh, put my feelers out and see, throw a little bit of palu in the water, and he just threw the net. But I think part of the struggle is for Hawaiians to get some land back, and for social justice, which is the same thread that unions are built upon. So I think the struggle, I completely agree that we're so intertwined that we have every reason to fight together. And to answer your question, I think that we really need to be pushing towards food production. And how do we take it into reality, the baby steps, and not just be talking on panels. I challenge myself as much as I can to do that. I've been fortunate. I lease a small 4-acre farm from Kamehameha Schools, and my goal is we're opening Lo'ikalo right now. And by the way, we need bodies if you guys want to do some service learning projects. On a weekend, 50 people come down means that's about 2 months of work for us. But one of the things that I'm looking at now is tying in this little farm that we got. I spent 7 years on Kaho'olawe during the cleanup as a restoration technician. And my job, I lived on the island half the month, and I was the field supervisor for restoration. During my time there, we planted over 100,000 native plants and trees, trying to reestablish native plant ecosystems. So what I'm trying to do now with this little aina, this land that we leased from Kamehameha, that's been degraded through bad industrial practices. It was a construction storage site at one point, and there's a lot of backfill. But I went from, okay, we also want to grow food. We're opening taro patches, but we also want to use the land to grow people. Yeah? How do we raise consciousness? How would we use it as a place to organize? And now I'm taking another step into looking at the kipuka concept, that small patch of revitalized ecosystem. And how can I be responsible for 4 acres towards climate change? How can I inundate that property with food-bearing trees and plants that make that small contribution?
Purple shirt. Okay, my question is, you're talking about restoring the monarchy, and I actually think it may not be as far-fetched as you think, because one country is getting towards independence, and that's Scotland. And the Scottish National Party has combined sort of this cultural ideal with Labour Party, with a new radical labour movement, so much that it's affected the Labour Party of England to actually go back to its old roots. Do you think this could serve as a model for Hawaii?
Look, I think that there's other models as well. If you look at Spain after Franco passed, it was the king that was the means that the Spanish people restored their democracy. And it isn't far-fetched. The problem, Hawaiian people could crown a monarch. The whole world recognized the Hawaiian monarchs. There's all kind of claims, but the fact is nobody can stop the Hawaiians from crowning a monarch. And nobody can stop that monarch from doing stuff. So it's not far-fetched at all. The only skeptical thing is, will the Hawaiians ever agree on who that might be? Because you have to actually have a consensus for that, right? But no, I don't think that, when you go back to the Constitution of 1860, that doesn't mean that's necessarily where you stay. That Constitution would have changed many times had Hawaii not been overthrown, and our government would have adapted as social changes happen. So I don't think it's far-fetched at all. And I do think, the Scottish basically did a referendum. I don't know that the American government would recognize any referendum, but maybe we should try it. But I don't know if it's a model. But in my opinion, we can talk about the legalities, we can talk about everything else. We need a symbol of our nation that we can unite and support if we want to rebuild our nation.
If I could just offer a comment real quick on that. Another option is looking beyond monarchy. I don't know if monarchy is appropriate for our time and for us. It could be a starting point. But one thing that I'm interested in is, and looking at some of the latest scholarship coming out, Professor Williamson Chang at the Law Center is the senior professor. And another professor who I didn't understand and didn't get, but I'm starting to, is Professor Francis Boyle, International Law. In a nutshell, in a simplistic explanation, he says that what we need to do is create some kind of body, political body of authority that can represent our people and begin to fight. One thing that comes to mind is the Palestinians. They were nobody, nothing, right, politically. They formed the Palestinian Authority. And it's baby steps, but now they have a seat, a non-voting seat at the UN, where they never even recognized. So I think that one option that we could do is just begin, and Bumpy has been calling for this for years, and I'm starting to realize it now. And well, we realized it at one point. We tried to organize a temporary government of national unity, just some kind of political body that can represent the people and the kingdom and the case. I think that's a sort of a baby step towards restoring the kingdom of Hawaii. But we don't have no political body that can represent us except the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and in my opinion, they haven't done a very good job.
Hi. One of the most pressing issues, cultural issues that I see is really happening in Hawaii public schools. Over half of the children in Hawaii public schools are Native Hawaiian students. How can we support our teachers in what's happening with the large class sizes that they're dealing with? And, I talk to single parents who are spending 2 and 3 hours of time with their children doing homework at night. How can we support all students in Hawaii public schools? Professor Reed talked a little bit tonight about the consequences of what happens when an entire city becomes a charter. So how can we support our teachers in fighting against this attack on Hawaii public schools?
I'm always happy to take the question. Look, we were proud to support our teachers when they did wildcat actions against the governor's attack on their pension, their benefits, and their wages. And we lent them concrete support. We sent staff and our leaders out there, our rank and file leaders out there. We made their signs. We led their big rally at the Capitol. My Kaiser team ran the chants, organized it for them because they hadn't had much practice. That union needs a lot of practice because we can support, but we're not them. So we need them to step forward so we can support them. And I think Corey and Amy and the new regime there, I have a little bit of experience with hostile executive boards and hard transitions in union leadership. But they're in the middle of it, and I'm quite optimistic that that union can turn itself from what amounts to be their staff or define themselves purely as grievance handlers. My staff, we say we're organizers that handle grievances. So I think there's a cultural change needed at HSTA from a sort of business union perspective to an organizing union perspective, so that the teachers can build the natural support. These are the people that take care of our kids. It's absolutely unconscionable that we as a community would allow our government to attack them and put them at the bottom of the list in terms of their wages and benefits, and then expect education to be a good experience. If we teach our teachers like that, we're teaching, how we're teaching our kids. So for me, the biggest thing, I want to help that union rebuild itself into what it can and should be. And, you know, with what's going on before the Supreme Court right now and the attack on public workers, they better get at it pretty quick.
I would also take a look at charter schools. I worked as a teacher for 4 years in a charter school. My son graduated from a charter school. They're not well funded, and they fall by the wayside. But we have some great Hawaiian charter schools out there. There are some problems, obviously, but I believe in the charter school movement, and it's something that I think that we really should apply more support for.
I think so.
Oh, can you hear this? Yeah, we can. Hello, hello. I don't know if it's on, but first of all, thank you everyone for showing up. This is views and a little bit tense perhaps at times, but I think it's worth it. So I'm going to ask a tense question. And I guess I'll start by pitching it to Adolph Reed. You know, seeing unions and workers' position as essentially in opposition to capital. That's where we are, really, and where we've always been. So I know that Adolph Reed had said in one of his articles, at least, that nationalism is always a class position. And I think by that you meant a bourgeois ruling class position. And so, you know, you mentioned, Eric mentioned Japan building up its defenses and so on. And Mahatma Gandhi, you know, cheered for that. And what happened is you got a huge empire that went out and slaughtered a bunch of people. And I'm not saying Hawaii is going to become that empire. I'm just questioning what is the nature of nationalism that it seems to serve ruling class interests 100% of the time. So where does that leave the class part, and how do you reconcile that with nationalism? Because I know there is such a thing as anti-imperialist nationalism, and you could get into a whole other discussion about it, but I'm just constantly worried about what nationalism is. So I'll just throw that out there. Adolph, and then hopefully the others will.
Well, yeah, okay, I'll take a shot. I mean, I guess the quick answer is it's complicated, right? I mean, if we look at the history, like the anti-colonial movements, right? I mean, you've got to. It's kind of like getting the colonial power out of the way is like a pretext for being able to build anything else. That's what happened in Cuba. That's what they tried to happen in Puerto Rico. That's what happened in a lot of Latin America, and of course in Algeria, and around what used to be called the Third World, right back in the day. Here's the problem, right? That what happens is that the nature of the struggle changes, right? I mean, after the nation becomes independent or autonomous, and then it's not necessarily a national struggle anymore. It's a struggle of class forces. Like within a nation. I mean, the Irish independence movement, I think, is a classic illustration of this, right? Because republicanism was like split in two factions, right? That there was a socialist faction with James Connolly. I just happened to see a couple of summers ago how he was executed at the prison in Dublin. And the Brits, I mean, those nasty bastards, right? And what can you say? They came by it honestly. But after the Easter Rising, right? I mean, like the movement was split, and the struggle, became an internal struggle, like as much as an external one. And that was true of the FLN in Algeria. It was true of the play socialist movement in Ghana and Guinea and elsewhere. So I mean, frankly, for me, like the idea, I mean, as an outsider, I mean, the idea of an Hawaiian struggle for national independence is kind of intriguing and exciting, right? I mean, it could put a bunch of shit in the game, I'll tell you that, right? I mean,
which would make things very interesting elsewhere too. So I mean, look, that's a problem. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be that dramatic, like the civil rights movement, right, on the mainland, or what's sometimes called the liberation movement, which is a construct I don't like precisely because that's a construct that papers over all of the different tendencies within it and imposes a false coherence. So that now, for instance, we have black governed cities, basically, where the local governing class is seamlessly integrated, and it makes sense they would be, right? Because they all live in the same neighborhoods. The kids go to blacks and whites, Hispanics, whatever. The kids go to the same schools. They went to the same schools. They buy the same stuff, consume the same lifestyles, they join the same clubs. But the contradiction is that the political rhetoric and superficial justifications for a political program that brought them to power and to keep them in power are kind of simplistically and monochromatically racial. And I think the city of New Orleans is like a good illustration of this. Even the drama of Katrina, which everybody in the world saw and thought that this was an illustration of racism. The fact of the matter is that blacks and whites were displaced at about the same rate. Whites actually died at a slightly higher rate. And the best predictor of who was displaced under livable conditions and got to come back was wealth and income on August 28th, 2005. And that was a better predictor than race. And what's been happening since then, with the logic of market-driven development, has also been polarized. Much more according to class than according to race. But the familiar discourse of mobilization is racial. Now the bright spot there actually is Local 2262, the Unite Here local that won recognition at Harrah's Casino and is expanding out into the hospitality sector, which is an organizing effort that failed, right, 15 years ago, the Hot Rock thing. And I just happened to meet with some of the leadership at that local when I was down there for the anniversary, and they're talking about ways now to become exactly the kind of political force for the working class in the city of New Orleans that you were talking about here. Because it's the same kind of workforce, right? That's, it's disproportionately black, but there are a whole lot of other people in it that, that all have the same problems. Okay.
We have to end it now so we can get the door prizes. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. No, I'm done.
Hey, wait a minute, I was about to say something.
Down my neck.
The Republican Party would like the nation to be a right to work, and I think it's not quite accurate. They want unions to be completely and simply made illegal in America, period. That's what they really want. And right to work is just a knife.
Right.
They want us to, they do not want unions ever again in America.
Right. Okay, you got the door prizes. Thank you, Noel.